She remembers the exact shade of the sky the morning they took him. Pale gray, the kind of gray that can't decide what it wants to be, not storming, not clearing, just sitting there, heavy and indifferent, the way the sky sometimes is when something is happening beneath it it has no opinion about. She was at her kitchen window. She was always at the windows those days, standing just far enough back that she could see everything without being seen, watching the street the way you watch something you already know is going to hurt you. The coffee was in her hand. The kids were still asleep. Gerald had left for work. She saw the police car before she saw Marcus. It pulled up slow. No sirens. The kind of arrival that is somehow worse than the loud kind because the loud kind leaves the room for mistakes. The quiet one means they are certain. Marcus came out his front door still pulling his jacket on. He was 22 years old, tall in the way young men are tall when they haven't yet learned to make themselves smaller. He was wearing his work boots, the heavy ones with the worn left sole she had watched him lace up on that porch 100 mornings, which meant they came before he had time to change, before he had time to prepare himself for whatever came next. They put his hand behind his back at the bottom of the porch steps. He turned once, just once, looked up and down the street with an expression she had never been able to fully describe herself. Not panic, not anger, something closer to disbelief, the look of a man waiting the world to correct his own obvious error. Waiting for a neighbor to come out and say, "Wait, stop, there's been a mistake." Waiting for the logic of his own innocence to be enough. Nobody came out. Claire stepped back from the window. She set her coffee cup down on the counter carefully, the way you set things down when your hands are not steady and you don't want to make a sound. She stood in her kitchen in the gray morning light and she listened to the car door close and the engine and the street got quiet again. And then she went and woke her children up for school. She had known Marcus since he was 9 years old, since he used to ride his bike in slow loops in front of his house while his mother Dora called after him from the porch about wearing a helmet, since he used to shovel her driveway in the winter without being asked and refused money for it. With a wave of his hand that was so much older than his age, it made her smile every time. She knew his mother the way women on the closed streets know each other, not intimately, not in a way of shared secrets, but in a way of shared mornings. The way of waving across the driveways, of knowing someone's schedule by the rhythm of their lights. Dora worked nights cleaning offices downtown and came home just before sunrise and still somehow had breakfast on the table by 7 for Marcus and his younger sister Renee. Claire had watched that woman carry a life on her back for 20 years and never once drop it. She knew Marcus wasn't capable of what they were saying. She knew that the way you know certain things about people, not from evidence exactly, but from years of small observations that accumulate into something more reliable than evidence. From the way he spoke to his mother, from the way he moved through the world without that particular hunger that trouble usually walks with. She also knew something else. Something she had been carrying since the night it happened. Something locked in the back of her chest in a place she had already, in just few short days, learned not to visit. The thing she knew could have stopped all of it. She let him get in that car anyway. Marcus would serve 11 years for a crime he did not commit. Claire would live across that street for every single one of them, and every morning, without exception, she and Dora would wave at each other across the distance between their houses. Neither of them ever missed a morning. Her name is Claire. That feels important to say now, before you decide how you feel about her. Before this becomes easier than it should be. She's not a monster in the way we prefer our monsters. Cold, calculated, obvious. She's something harder to look at than that. She is ordinary. She was 34 that summer, married 7 years to a man named Gerald who sold insurance and coached Little League and fell asleep every night by 9:30. Two kids, a boy and a girl, 8 and 6, a house that needed a new roof, a life that worked mostly if you didn't press on it too hard. What she knew was this: the night of the robbery, a convenience store 2 blocks over, the owner badly beaten, cash taken. Claire had been sitting on her porch, couldn't sleep. Gerald was snoring, the kids were down, and she'd taken her tea outside and sat in the dark the way she sometimes did when the smallest of her life felt like it was pressing on her chest. She saw someone leave the scene, running, cutting through the alley beside her house, coming close enough that she could see his face clearly under the streetlight. It was not Marcus. She knew exactly who it was. His name was Denny. Gerald's younger brother, 25 years old, already in and out of trouble, already costing their family money and silence and covered stories, and Gerald's mother crying on the phone at midnight. She saw Danny. Danny saw her. He stopped for a half second, just long enough, then he ran. By morning, Marcus was the only name anyone was talking about, and Claire had already decided without fully deciding to say nothing. Let's talk about what 11-year actually looks like. Not in the abstract, not as a number or a legal term or a statistic in a report about wrongful convictions. Let's talk about it in a way Claire watched it, slowly, daily, from across the street she never left. Claire found out about Marcus's mother cancer the same week of the robbery. A small thing, caught early. That was what most doctors said. Caught early, very treatable. But the treatment was expensive in a ways that treatment always is when you're a woman working two jobs without the kind of insurance that covers everything. She managed it. Dora always managed, but Marcus never knew because by the time they told him, he was already in a cell 300 miles away, and they waited until after surgery to call him so he wouldn't worry. And he found out lying on a cot in a room he hadn't chosen, unable to do a single thing, unable to be there, unable to hold his mother's hands in the way a son does. That is what 11 years look like. Renee, Marcus's younger sister, 17 when he went away, grew up in a house where her brother's absence was a physical presence. She graduated high school without him, went to community college, then transferred, then dropped out, then went back. The way life goes on when you're doing it without a person who was supposed to be there doing it alongside with you. She got married at 26 to a good man named Calvin, and she sat in front row of that church with her mother and an empty seat beside her that was technically not empty because he had put a photograph on it of Marcus in his good shirt. A photograph at his sister's wedding. Renee's first child was a boy. He named him Marcus Jr. without hesitating, she said, and Claire heard this secondhand. A block party with a cup of something cold in her hand and a smile fixed on her face. She said she wanted her son to know from the very beginning that his uncle's name was a good name, that it belonged to a good man, that whatever the world had said about it, the name was worth keeping. Dora sold the car in 2 years, the good furnitures in 3 years, took a second job at 61, cleaning a second office building on the other side of the city, coming home now at 7 in the morning instead of 5, sleeping for 4 hours, getting up to do it again. Claire used to watch her light go out in the early afternoon, the bedroom light, then the kitchen, and the track of rhythm of a woman running on nothing but love and stubbornness, on an absolute refusal to stop. Meanwhile, Gerald got a promotion, bought a boat he used 4 times, coached little leagues for 6 straight years, all the way until her son aged out, and was given a plaque at the end of the season banquet that Claire has on her shelf at the hallway. Danny moved to another state, Georgia, then later Tennessee, and got married and 2 children and sent Christmas cards with a photo of his family every year, the kids growing bigger in each one, gap tooth, smiles, and matching pajamas and golden retrievers. Gerald always put the card at the refrigerator. Claire always took it down after a few weeks. Gerald never asked why. She sat in church every Sunday, third view from the front, left side, where her family had sat since her children were babies. She sang the hymn she had sung since childhood. She nodded when the pastor talked about truth and justice and the moral weight of what we had to do and what we failed to do. She put money in the offerings plate. She shook hands at the door. She was, by very observable measure, a good woman. That is the part that should disturb you the most. Not the monsters do monstrous things. That story we know how to hold. That part that should disturb you is how goodness can coexist with the buried thing, how a person can genuinely kind, genuinely loving, genuinely present in all the ways that count, and still have something locked in a room inside them that is costing someone else something. Claire was not performing goodness. She was good, and Marcus was in a cell, and both of those things, can they be true at the same time? She asked herself. That is the part about human nature nobody wants to sit with. We want the villain to be hollow. We want the silence to have come from somewhere dark and obvious. But Claire's silence came from the same place of our goodness did. From love, from fear, from the desperate ancient human need to protect the life you have built, from the ordinary, unremarkable, absolutely unforgiving choice to save yourself. He was 33 years old when he walked back down that street. 11 years changes a body in ways that are hard to describe to someone who hasn't watched it happen. He was thinner, not unhealthy, but carved down like something essential has been removed and the rest had reorganized itself around the absence. He moved differently, slower, with a carefulness that wasn't timidly but wasn't close to its neighbor, the carefulness of a man who had learned that the world does not always make room for him and has decided to take less of it just in case. He carried one bag. He stopped at the door of his mother's porch steps and didn't knock, just stood there like he needed a moment to believe the house was real. And Dora came out before he even lifted his hands. She must have been watching from the window. She must have been watching from the window every morning for 11 years just in case this was the morning. The sound she made when she reached him, Claire heard it through her closed window. She has never told anyone what it sounded like. Some things belong only to the person who witnessed them. But she will tell you this, it was not relief exactly. It was not joy, though joy was somewhere in it. It was something that had been waiting so long it had almost stopped believing in itself. Something that has gone so quiet it had forgotten its own name, and then suddenly it remembered. That's what it sounded like. Marcus Jr. came on the screen door, 4 years old, having only ever known his uncle as a photography on a shelf and name said carefully by a woman in his family, and peered out at this tall, quiet stranger at his grandmother's porch. He stood there, with one hand on the doorframe, assessing the way small children assess things with seriousness that adults have mostly unlearned. Marcus saw him. He stepped back gently from his mother, looked at the boy for a moment, and then crouched down slowly until he was eye level. He held out his hand. The boy looked at it, looked at his grandmother, looked back at that hand, and took it. Claire watched all of it from her window. She did not go outside. She stood exactly where she stood 11 years ago. Same window, same kitchen, same hands, and watched Marcus come home to a life that had been running without him. Watched his mother's shoulder finally drop from somewhere around her ears. Watched a 4-year-old boy shake the hands of an uncle he had only known as a name worth keeping. And something happened in her chest. Not an opening, not a release, not the thing you might hope for. The crack that became a door, that becomes a confession, that becomes an ending with some shape on it. Just a fracture. The hairline kind. The kind that doesn't announce itself. The kind that spreads slowly somewhere. Something that never was solid as it looked. Gerald came behind her, put his hand on her shoulders. "He's back," he said. "I know," she said. Gerald went to pour himself coffee. Claire stayed at the window. What she did not know yet, what she would find out 8 months later, was that Marcus has spent the last 2 years of his sentence working with a legal advocacy group on his own case. That was a law student named Piria had found an inconsistency in the original witness testimony, that there was a formal wrongful conviction review already quietly underway, that the buried thing was not going to stay buried, that someone somewhere was already digging. The letter came on a Tuesday, not to Claire, to Gerald, from Danny. Gerald read it at the kitchen table on a Wednesday morning while Claire was making lunches for the kids. She didn't notice his face at first. She was focused on the sandwiches, on the arguments their daughter was having with their son about something she felt enormous at 8 years old and would be invisible by 30. And by the time she looked, Gerald was just sitting there with a paper in his hands, an expression she had never seen on him before. She asked him what it was. He didn't answer immediately. He set the letter down. He looked at the table. He looked at his hands. He looked at her in a way that told her everything before he said a word. "Danny wrote a confession," he said. "He sent it to me first. He's going to send it to the police." The kitchen went quiet. Their daughter was still talking. Their son had started eating his cereal. The dog was asleep under the table with his chin on Claire's foot. All the ordinary furniture of her ordinary life exactly where it had always been. "He found God," Gerald said, and his voice was strained, not mocking, not relieved, something in between that had no clean name. "He said he found God and he can't carry it anymore." Claire sat down. She sat down in the chair from her husband, across from her husband. She looked at the letter on the table between them and did not touch it. Gerald said, "Claire?" She said nothing. He said, "Did you know?" And this is the moment. This is the one she had been building her cathedral against for 11 years. This is the question she had answered in her head 10,000 different ways. The explanation, the justifications, the carefully constructed architecture of I wasn't certain and I was afraid and I thought the system would. She looked at her husband. She said, yes. What happened after is not a clean story. Gerald did not forgive her immediately. He did not forgive her the same way husbands forgive in films, with tears and hands held in a speech about choosing each other. He went very, very quiet, very, very far away and stayed there for a very, very long time. Right there in their home, in their bed, at their table, further away from she had ever felt any one person has ever made her feel, while remaining physically present. Danny's confession went to the police. Then the legal team was already working Marcus's case. The review moved faster after that. Witnesses were re-interviewed. The original case unraveled in the way wrongful convictions unravel. Not dramatically, not all at once, but steadily, piece by piece, like a sweater pulled from a single loose thread until there's nothing left but evidence of how it was made. Marcus was formally exonerated 8 months after he came home. There was a smart article in the local paper, a large one online. His family stood at the courthouse steps and Dora wore a yellow dress and held her son's arm and did not stop crying through the entirety of the photography. Renee held Marcus Jr. on her hips. Calvin stood at the edge of the frame with his hand on Renee's back. Claire saw the photograph. She did not go to the courthouse. The advocacy group filed a civil suit on Marcus's behalf. The city settled. The amount was not made public, but Dora paid off her house, which is the detail that Claire had turned over in her hands more than any other. Dora paid off her house, the house where she watched her son get put in a police car, the house where she ran 2 jobs for 11 plus years, the house where she put a photograph in a church at her daughter's wedding. Dora paid off her house with the money that was supposed to make up for it. There is no amount that makes up for it, and anyone who's ever lost 11 years knows that. Claire did eventually speak up to investigators, not because she came forward, but because she found her. Because once Danny's confession opened the case, they went through everyone on that street and they sat across from her in her own living room and asked her what she knew, and she told them all of it. The porch, the street light, Danny's face, the second that passed between seeing him and deciding to go inside. She told them everything. Then she told her husband everything. Then he said, did you ever think about Marcus? In all that time, did you ever think about him? She wanted to say yes. She wanted to say she thought about him consistently, that he haunted her, that he carried her every day. She said, I thought about Danny and you and the kids. I thought about what it would do to this family. Gerald nodded slowly. So no, he said, not really.